That's the most magnificent thing I've ever seen, Uri.
What's up, MetaNerds? This video will cover the Eclipse class Dreadnought. And to get this out of the way early, there is a canon version of this ship, which is incredibly important to the survival of the Imperial Remnant and rise of the First Order. But everything seems to point to that just being your standard Super Star Destroyer of the Executor class. I will cover that in a separate video soon, but this video will be a complete breakdown in history of the awesome Legends Eclipse, the super weapon that was one of the most powerful creations in galactic history, and by far the most powerful of the Galactic Civil War era. And we'll even touch on the short life of the Eclipse too. Well, let's start with its purpose. Admiral Conan Antonio Madi tells us that the Eclipse class, and its sister ship class, the Sovereign, were a part of the Emperor's 100-year plan for the galaxy. When these could come to replace your standard Star Destroyers and even Super Star Destroyers, then Palpatine could be certain that there would be no chance of rebellion, or even extragalactic invasion. So these would act as one step below the Death Star, being more mobile and practical for ship-to-ship warfare, while being able to destroy a city in an instant, or even the entire planet if wanted. Like all of the Star Destroyers, this behemoth would be constructed at the orbital shipyards of Kuat Drive Yards, officially starting construction in the same year as the Battle of Yavin. The entire ship would be built around the Superlaser weapon. By this point, the prototypes of the Death Star hidden in the Maul installation were proving just how powerful this weapon was. This green composite beam had blown apart a Star Destroyer in a single blast, disintegrated a rebel-held Lucrehulk named the Fortessa after only firing the beam at 4%. And in this same year they would see it fired at full power, turning the entire planet of Alderaan into space dust. The idea of placing one of these super lasers inside of a ship came shortly after this, seen in Admiral Victor Strang's flagship, the Conqueror. The midsection of a standard ISD was hollowed out to fire this composite beam, but the problem was that this had even worse defenses against rebel ships than your normal ISD. If rebels took this thing out, you lost that incredibly expensive super weapon. So in typical Palpatine fashion, he decided that this weapon should be placed in a vessel that would be large enough to act as a mobile space station. I do wonder if Thrawn would have accepted this as a happy medium, as he thought concentrating all of the resources in a single Death Star was foolish. I'm sure he still would have seen this as overkill, but at least making several eclipses would have been a better way to spend your time in credits, as these could still crack the mantle of planets and leave them in ruins. Not blown to dust, but everything from the seismic to atmospheric activity would turn the world hellish, resulting in the death of nearly every living being on world. So it wouldn't erase it from the map, but I think the psychological effect would be similar, if not worse, as the rebellious worlds would then act as smoldering warning signs to anyone who might have been flirting with the idea of treason. It was determined that the Eclipse would have an incredible length of 17,500 meters, or nearly 11 miles long. That's about 11 Star Destroyers, or an ISD shorter than the Super Star Destroyers of the Executor class. It's also 117 CR-90s back to back. It would be around 8,510 meters, or 5¼ miles wide, which is nearly 9 times an ISD, or about 3 Lucrehulks across. And at a height of 5,910 meters, or 3.7 miles, it was 12 times the height of the ISD, or equivalent to 61 Zillo Beasts. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be about twice the size of Manhattan, and 7 times the Burj Khalifa. Or another way to think of it is that it would be more than half of the way down to the bottom of the ocean. Now, though the super laser was the focus, this gradual sloping of the sides and this sharp bow up front are two features designed to ensure that the Eclipse can dominate in a space battle. There are an incredible 550 heavy laser cannons, 500 turbo lasers, and 75 ion cannons all spread out across the surface of this ship, stacked in layers right above each other to make sure that each of these guns could always get their shot on target. And this would be more than 8 times the guns on a single ISD. So this one ship had the firepower of a large fleet without even counting the super laser. A funny way to think of it is that you had that big Imperial fleet over Endor along with the Death Star, and so the Eclipse by itself is like a mini version of all that packed into one single ship. But wait, there's more. It had 100 tractor beams, 10 times the ISD that could bully around rebel corvettes, and it had 10 gravity well projectors. These rounded parts not being the bulging reactors like we see on other Star Destroyers, they're actually these that we see on the Interdictor. So keeping with that fleet comparison, it would be like if you added to your fleet 2.5 Interdictor class destroyers, which had the ability to both rip ships out of hyperspace, or prevent the enemy from making the jump into the safety of the blue void. The bridge would be located in your typical Star Destroyer spot, but would have its own unique shape. It contained the comm tower, the communications array, and the main sensor array, a suite of technology that would have been more advanced than most space stations or busy trading ports. as the sheer number of ships that would launch from the Eclipse was incredible, and its intended role as a single ship that could shut down whole rebel fleets and even planets meant it had to account for thousands of variables concerning both enemy and civilian craft. This area also contained a large, specialized team of deflector shield operators, as it's the only ship I've seen that actually identifies a separate deflector shield command. What I find hilarious is that they placed it above the bridge, in the most exposed part of the ship, just a little extra incentive to make sure they were on their toes, and the first ones to die if systems were to fail. The charge for the laser would use the full length of the ship to build up a composite beam, and is something that may indicate that this is the bare minimum length possible. Jokes aside about how Sidious always seems to be overcompensating with his ridiculously large ships, perhaps with this weapon system, the ship really did have to be this big. At the rear, we see the 6 enhanced Sublight engines, though what enhanced means exactly is still kept an Imperial secret. This is what gives the Eclipse and Super Star Destroyers their red ion glow instead of blue, which helped to give this city-sized ship a maximum acceleration of 940 G, which is 4.5 times slower than a TIE fighter, about 1/3 that of a Venator, and about 76% that of the Executor class Dreadnought. And its hyperdrive was on par with most ISDs, rated as a Class 2. So this thing can get across the galaxy quicker than most cargo ships, and even tied with some starfighters. Now as for its complement, there were enough ships here to black out binary star systems. No normal TIE fighters, just specializing in the elite TIE Interceptor for an anti-fighter role, and bombers for an anti-capital ship role. 50 squads of interceptors, totaling 600 individual ships, and 8 squads of bombers, totaling 96 ships. There would also be a vast number of shuttles, not just used to travel from capital ship to capital ship, or even down to a surface, but actually to quickly travel across the Eclipse itself. It also contained 100 AT-ATs and 5 prefabricated bases. You can see that these bases were not simple war tents, but massive fortresses that could lock down a whole city. These craft would be contained in hangars scattered around the ship, and you can see in this one cluster just how many hangars there were and how they were all stacked on top of each other. While the ventral side of the Eclipse contained the larger aft launch bay that could take in things like gunships and corvettes, while this fore launch bay was large enough to take in a Victory-class Star Destroyer. It would have been overkill, but I imagine it wouldn't have been too good for Rebel morale to see this sort of super-duper Star Destroyer give birth to a baby Star Destroyer, when you know that the baby was more powerful than most things in the Rebel fleet. Now, as you might expect, to run all of this, you needed a large crew, which might as well be called a population, as the Eclipse was really a city in its own right. Some reports have the minimum crew as low as 88,500, but fully operational, it would need 708,470 crew members, of which 4,175 were just operating the weapon systems. They would be accompanied by 150,000 troops, and a Royal Guard Legion, a Comp Force Assault Battalion, which was a unique combo of special forces but also bordering religious zealots, and their intense love of the Emperor and the New Order. They were known to be Palpatine's eyes and ears everywhere they went, keeping officers and admirals in check. It also had Imperial Sovereign Protectors, the elite of the elite chosen out of the standard Royal Guards, and they would only answer to the Emperor. To feed all these people, it had storage of 600,000 tons of material, which is the weight equivalent to 750,000 dewbacks, and it was said that there was enough consumables on board to last them all 10 years. Just to give some comparisons for that, the population of the Eclipse gets close to that of the entirety of San Francisco, and around 4 times the total population of Tatooine. It's equivalent to 143 Nimitz-class carriers, and more than the total active duty of both the US Army and US Navy combined. While the cargo would be roughly equivalent to 24 large container ships. It should also be noted that the entire ship was covered in this reinforced black durasteel and quadranium alloy. This of course helped with incoming attacks, but could also be used as a weapon of its own with that bow. It was purpose-made to smash into enemy capital ships and space stations. Think of how ridiculous it would be if you were in your secret rebel base in some remote part of the galaxy, and had the sun eclipsed by this thing as it emerged from hyperspace, and just plowed through your facility without firing a shot. We also have to mention how it could break through planetary shields in a single burst. Though its one-shot sniping of enemy capital ships is impressive, it's the planetary shield breaking that really impressed admirals. Because the orbital bombardments from Star Destroyers work, but they just take a lot longer, giving the enemy time to escape through secret passages, prepare for defense, or call in reinforcements. Or in extreme cases, you have what happened to Thrawn, where rebels had set up a series of shields that could absorb the blast long enough for the other shields to regenerate. this layer creating something that effectively could not be taken out by anything that the ISDs had. So it could shoot your capital ship down, it could blast through your planetary shield and destroy your entire city, or it can just plow through your ships and space stations. So the Eclipse really did have it all covered. Its construction started in 0 BBY, and Palpatine would visit the construction site of the Eclipse often. Located over Kuat drive yards and with a powerful Imperial fleet on constant guard, this was one of the safest locations in the galaxy. Thus, the Emperor would use one of its rooms as an important meeting location and place vaults full of valuable information. It might seem odd to set up in an unfinished ship that is still currently under construction, but we actually saw the same thing with Darth Vader, who was living in the Executor and even training his apprentice Starkiller, all inside of his Super Star Destroyer while it was being built. At the same time, the Eclipse 2 was also being built over the core world of Biss, while the Tarkin superweapon was also being completed. That started out as another prototype Eclipse, but was converted into this platform that still hosts the similarly powerful Superlaser. One of the most powerful criminals of the Galactic Civil War era was Tiber Zahn, and he had an intricate network of spies that alerted him to this monstrosity being built over Kuat. He kept an eye on it for 4 years, but that planetary defense fleet over the Empire's primary shipyard never showed any signs of weakness. It wasn't until the Emperor's death during the Battle of Endor that some Imperial forces were finally being pulled from Kuat. Without missing a beat, Zahn led an attack to try and raid the Eclipse, drawn by the rumors of the secret vaults of the Emperor himself. As he arrived, he was met with a well-known smuggler turned rebel general.
What is your purpose in this sector?
We heard of the Alliance's glorious victory at Endor and have come to join.
The rebellion wanted to use the confusion over the death of the Imperial head of state to launch a quick capture of the Imperial shipwright world, and they were willing to take the help of Zahn and his consortium forces. Together they were able to create an opening for the crime boss to board the still unfinished Eclipse. Though much of the hull was still not completed, the Superlaser was fully operational, showing that the Imperial engineers had created a deadly masterpiece. Its green laser was not only taking out Star Destroyers in a single shot, but it had remarkable accuracy. The targeting system at the bow of the ship allowing it to strike anything within a wide circular arc, hitting ships that are off to its sides, and pinpointing single craft out of a cluster. An Executor-class dreadnought, the Annihilator, would show up, only to be one-shotted as well. In a previous attack on Coruscant, Zahn was able to secure the passkey from the Imperial archives, and with it, he finally had access to these mythical vaults.
There is more wealth in these hidden vaults than even I can imagine.
He may have been tempted by the power, but Zahn knew that the credits were all in information, and that there was no way he could make off with this ship.
I've no need to keep the half-constructed Eclipse, and it presents a target even the rebels couldn't miss.
But you should never underestimate rebel incompetence. The Imps would be able to secure the ship and retain control of Kuat until 8.5 ABY. But more than 4 years after the Battle of Endor, this ship was still not completed, meaning that it took longer than the Death Star project. The New Republic would finally launch a large enough invasion of Kuat that most of the Kuat employees and loyal Kuati had to pack inside of the Eclipse and make the jump to Biss, the core world where Palpatine was still secretly ruling his empire, defying death through his mastery of cloning tech and Sith alchemy. From this new body, he would oversee the completion of the Eclipse in Eclipse 2, and the ship would act as a mobile command post for the Empire, where the Imperial Remnant would plan their war strategies. A year and a half later, in 10 ABY, Palpatine would make his first major offensive against the New Republic, deploying the World Devastators to Mon Cala, which really shows his hatred of the Fishfolk, as Mon Cala was going to be the second target of the first Death Star, and the first target of the DS2. Though this battle would result in an NR victory, the Eclipse went on a terror streak throughout the galaxy. Word spread that this was the personal flagship of the Emperor, and so every time it showed up, everyone was scrambling to just flee. Frustrated at this, the next attack would be on the Republic headquarters at Dasucha 5. Using its vast array of comm systems, the Eclipse was able to flood every frequency with the Emperor's message to Leia. The rebels could not get a distress signal out, and so Leia gave in to his demands. Luke was being pulled by the dark side, and was at the Emperor's side throughout this whole campaign, originally hoping to bring down the Emperor from within his operation. But when Leia came before them, she was able to convince Luke that they could fight him together. To show just how powerful the dark side was, Sidious created a force storm, a ripping torrent of pure dark side energy that was set to consume the NR fleet. But together, the children of Anakin were to focus on the light, creating a wave of power that turned the storm towards the Emperor's prize ship. The two Jedi escaping just moments before the decade-long creation was ripped into space debris. But the Emperor's spirit would incarnate once more. Again leading from Biss, he was able to complete the construction of the Eclipse II, taking it to the homeworld of the Sith on Korriban, and nearly destroying it in our fleet during the Battle of Onderon. Here, Lando and R2 would work together to take control of the ship's hyperdrive systems, and the galaxy's longest-lived hero would save the day once more, with R2 recalculating the ship's hyperdrive to have it emerge at the exact coordinates of the Galaxy Gun, another one of the revived Emperor's planet-killing superweapons. When it popped into real space, the collision was instant and catastrophic, bringing a final end to the Eclipse line. This would also mean the near extinction of the Royal Guards as well, with those on board being the last alive, though a few, including Kirkanos and Karnor Jax, would carry that legacy forward. And this explosion also sent a Galaxy Gun shell at Biss, destroying the world and killing all of the Emperor's remaining clones. So that's it for the Eclipse, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. A lot of this footage was gameplay from people playing on YouTube with different mods of Empire at War. All of them are linked down in the description, as well as the sources on some of the fan art used. It was originally introduced in Empire at War Forces of Corruption, and I just wanted to point out how absurd it looks on the minimap. The designers based the look of the bow and how it was used on the rams of ancient Greek and Roman ships. And there are a ton of discrepancies across different lore books, and even how it's seen, with the Eclipse 2 ending up with more engines, and a lot of those mods had different amounts as well. The length is off from the Dark Empire sourcebook to the complete encyclopedia, but what was presented is what is most consistent. The majority of the works have the same stats, and so those are the official ones listed in what I used. Additional information comes from the Essential Guide to Warfare, Starships of the Galaxy, and the Imperial Handbook. If you liked the video, please hit that like button and leave a comment. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm. And subscribe if you want to see more. Be sure to check out the description where you can get cool Star Wars art and free Audible audiobooks. There you can also find ways to support the channel for free, or check out our Patreon and PayPal. For just $1, your name could be here. A special shout out to our $25 tier, Chris Garcia, Andrew Ban, Seraph Diaz, Cass Costello, and Carlos Velez. But most important of all, remember, there's always a bigger ship, and the Force will be with you, always.